river was swollen from days of rain, its surface boiling with white foam, branches and debris sweeping past with the power of 100 horses. And Ilara gripped the edge of the wooden bridge with trembling hands as she tried to steady her breath. She had crossed this river dozens of times before, but never when it raged like this, never when the boards beneath her feet groaned as though they might split and send her tumbling. She told herself to be brave, told herself that she had no choice. Her supplies were low, her farm too far from town to wait another week. But courage is a fragile thing when the earth itself seems determined to swallow you. The wind howled, her bonnet tore loose, and as she reached the midpoint of the bridge, a plank snapped beneath her boots. The world tilted, her scream was drowned by the roar of water, and in an instant the current seized her, cold and merciless, dragging her under as though she were no more than a twig in its grasp. She fought, kicking, clawing toward the surface, her lungs burning, her mind screaming that this was the end, that the river would claim her as it had claimed others before. But just as her strength faltered, a shadow cut through the spray, strong arms wrapped around her waist, and she was yanked upward into air and light. She coughed, choked, gasped, clinging to the stranger who had plunged in after her. The cowboy's face was wet and hard-set, his hat gone, his eyes fierce with determination as he pulled her toward the shallows. Each stroke seemed to defy the river's pull, muscles straining against the current, and when at last his boots found purchase on the rocky bank, he hauled her out of the water, collapsing with her against the mud. She shook violently, her teeth chattering, her body refusing to believe she was safe, and without a word he gathered her into his arms, wrapping her tight against his chest, his warmth and steadiness breaking through her panic. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice deep and steady as the earth itself. "You're safe. I've got you." She clung to him, water streaming from her dress, eyes wide with shock and disbelief, and for the first time since the river swallowed her, she let herself breathe. The cabin was small, built of rough-hewn logs and smelling of pine and smoke, but to Ilara it felt like the first solid ground she had stood on since the river had tried to claim her. The cowboy had carried her most of the way, his arms steady around her waist, his pace unbroken despite the mud that sucked at their boots and the storm that threatened more rain. Now she sat by the fire he had built, wrapped in a blanket so thick it swallowed her shoulders, watching the flames dance as the water steamed from her hair. The crackle of the logs filled the silence, but her mind was far from quiet. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the pull of the current again, the icy grasp of death, and it made her shiver so violently that the cup of tea in her hands rattled. The cowboy crouched across from her, his hat drying on the table, his shirt clinging to his broad frame, and for the first time she studied the man who had saved her. His face was weathered by sun and trail dust, his eyes the kind that had seen too much yet still burned with life, and when he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she expected. "River don't forgive easy," he said, stirring the fire with a stick. "But neither do folks who've lost to it." She swallowed, the words catching in her throat, and whispered, "It nearly took me, just like it took my brother." The confession slipped out before she could stop it, raw and aching, and her eyes welled at the memory of the boy who had vanished downstream years ago. The cowboy's gaze lifted, steady and unflinching, and he nodded once. Not with pity, but with understanding. "Then you know it don't get easier alone." Ilara blinked, startled by how plainly he spoke, how his words cut through the wall she had built around herself. She wanted to ask his name, to understand why he risked his life for a stranger. But before she could, a howl split the night, distant yet sharp, followed by another and then another. Wolves. Her heart jumped, but the cowboy rose to his feet with calm precision, checking the rifle propped near the door. "Rest easy," he said, his voice as steady as the fire. "They won't come near while I'm here." She clutched the blanket tighter, watching him stand guard like a wall of flesh and bone between her and the dark. And for the first time since the river, she felt more than safety. She felt the faint stir of trust, fragile but real, flickering in her chest like a second flame beside the fire. Morning broke with a pale sun rising over the wet earth, the air cool and sharp, carrying the smell of pine and river silt. And Ilara woke to find the cowboy already outside, saddling his horse with the quiet precision of a man who belonged to the trail, more than to any one place. Her body still trembled with the memory of the current, her dreams full of water and fear. But when she stepped outside the cabin and saw him standing there, Calm and steady, she felt the weight ease just enough for her to breathe. He looked up, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. And for the first time since pulling her from the river, he offered a half smile. "Rough but kind. River tried to take you," he said, adjusting the stirrup. "But you're still here. That means something." She wanted to ask what it meant, why he cared, why a man who owed her nothing had risked everything. But before the words could form, the sound of hooves carried from the ridge. Not wolves this time, men. 2 riders, hard-faced and watchful. Men she recognized from town as debt collectors, who had long circled her land, like vultures waiting for her to falter. Fear gripped her, but the cowboy stepped forward, his hand resting easy on the butt of his revolver, his stance wide and unshaken. The riders slowed, their sneers sharp, their words cruel as they called out threats. But the cowboy's silence was louder than their noise. His presence alone was enough to make them hesitate, and when he finally spoke, his voice was iron. "You'll turn back now." The standoff stretched, the air thick with danger, until at last the riders cursed under their breath, wheeled their horses and vanished down the trail. Alara's knees nearly gave way with relief, and when she turned to the cowboy, her eyes burned with tears she hadn't expected. "Why do this for me?" she whispered, her voice breaking. He looked at her for a long moment, then said simply, "Because no one deserves to be left to fight the current, alone, river or otherwise." The truth in his words struck her deeper than the cold water ever had, and as he mounted his horse, he reached down a calloused hand. "Come on," he said, his tone softer now. "You've got hills yet to climb. Best not climb them alone." She placed her hand in his, and as he pulled her up into the saddle behind him, she knew the river hadn't just tried to drown her. To someone, and the current of her life had shifted forever. If this story touched your heart, and subscribe for more powerful cowboy tales of courage and redemption. Don't forget to like, share,